There are some things that cannot be explained. Even after years of hearing about them, they still send shivers down our spines. This is one such case. A security guard was working the night shift in an abandoned building. Suddenly, he heard some movement on the upper floor. He rushed over to investigate. As he rounded the corner, he saw a horrifying sight. The building was quite tall, but it was empty most of the time. There were no tenants. The building was going through renovations and would remain so for a while. The dragging sound seemed to come from the other side of the wall. She was wearing a long white dress that reached her ankles. Her hair was long and dark, covering her face. She hadn't noticed him yet. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. How could there be someone in an abandoned building? He was the only person who was supposed to be in here. He followed the sound and found her in the same spot where he had first seen her. He followed her, still trying to talk to her, but she kept ignoring him. But his scream died in his throat when he saw what was behind him. There was nothing there. He looked back at the spot where she had been standing, and it was empty. He couldn't believe what he had just seen. He was scared, confused, and intrigued all at the same time. He wanted to find her, but he didn't know where to start. He quickly changed the channel and saw that she was gone. He watched her walk down the street and disappear from view. He didn't know what to do. He had seen her, but how could she have been in the building? He had searched the entire building, and there was no one else there. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. He looked back at the monitor, and she was back in the office. But before he could dial 911, he saw her again. He didn't know the answer, but he knew that he had seen her. She was standing in the doorway, smiling at him. He screamed, but she was gone before he could finish his sentence. He called the police and told them what had happened. They came and searched the building, but they found nothing. They couldn't believe his story, and he didn't blame them. He watched as she got up and walked towards the door. As she opened the door, he could see that she was gone. He didn't know what to do. He wanted to help her, but he was scared. He followed her all the way to the end of the hallway, and then she turned and looked at him. In the security footage, he could see that the woman was dragging herself along the hallway. The dragging sound he had heard was her feet. But how could this be? She had been standing upright when he had seen her. Why was she dragging herself in the footage? He could see the hatred in her eyes. She took a step towards him, and he took a step back. She took another step, and he did the same. He checked the footage from inside the office and saw her again. She was sitting in a chair and dragging herself towards the window. He watched as she stared out the window for a few moments, and then he saw her do something impossible. She turned around and smiled. This went on for a few moments, and then she stopped. She was sitting on the floor and dragging herself closer to the wall. He watched her for a few moments, and then he did something crazy. He reviewed the footage from the past few hours and saw the woman. He had seen her enter the building through the front door and had walked straight to the elevator. He had missed her by only a few minutes. He watched as she entered the elevator and went up to the 3rd floor. He followed her into the elevator and up to the 3rd floor. He walked up to her and asked, "Are you okay?" She turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes were wide and blank. She didn't respond. He tried again. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Still nothing. He reached out to her and she slapped his hand away. He wanted to ask her a question, but his voice wouldn't cooperate. He was frozen in place. He couldn't move. He stopped in his tracks. What could it be? It didn't sound human, but it wasn't mechanical either. As he thought about it, the sound came again. He turned and saw something that made his heart skip a beat. On the night of March 26th, everything changed. The security guard was making his regular rounds when he heard a noise coming from the 3rd floor. It was an odd sound, a dragging sound. He couldn't quite place it, but it was definitely coming from above him. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't. He felt like he was trapped in a nightmare. He watched her go, and then he noticed something strange. She had been dragging her feet the whole time. He couldn't believe what he had just seen. He wanted to follow her, but he was scared. He knew he should call the police, but he didn't want to seem crazy. He decided to wait and see if she came back. The woman took a step towards him, and he took a step back. She took another step, and he did the same. This went on for a few moments, and then she stopped. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. His blood ran cold, and then she disappeared. He couldn't believe what he had just seen. But when he checked the camera footage, it made the hair on his arms stand up. What had he just seen? Night shifts are tough. It can be incredibly boring at times, but there's also the fear of the unknown. For many people, this is enough to make the job unappealing. Others, however, don't mind it and enjoy the peace and quiet of an empty office. He walked towards the elevator and pressed the button to go up. When the door opened, he stepped inside and rode the elevator to the top floor. It was completely silent and dark. He could barely see anything. The only light came from the emergency exit signs. He exited the elevator and began walking. He was listening intently, trying to hear the sound again, but it was gone. One such person was a security guard who worked for a large corporation. They had lots of offices around the city, but none were particularly large. The security guard often had to travel between buildings, which could take up a lot of his time. He had been assigned to the Richardson Towers for the last 2 months. He decided to investigate, even though he knew there shouldn't be anyone in the building. He continued walking down the hallway. Suddenly, he heard it again, right next to him. There was a woman standing in front of him. She turned her head slightly, and he could see her face. It was pale and expressionless. Her eyes were wide and stared directly at him. She looked at him for a few seconds, and then turned and walked away. He waited for a few minutes, and then he heard the dragging sound again. She stood up and walked away without saying a word. She stared at him for a few seconds, and then suddenly she was gone. He blinked, and she reappeared behind him. He turned around and screamed. He decided to check the security footage to see if he could get any answers. When he got off the elevator, he saw something that made his blood run cold. He continued watching and saw that she went into one of the offices. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Her smile was wide and evil. Her eyes were filled with malice. He checked the footage from outside the building and saw her walking away from the building. He decided to call the police and tell them what he had seen. He had seen her, but how could she be dead? She had been dragging herself along the hallway. Why would she drag herself if she was alive? Do you believe the security guard? What do you think he saw? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Night shift workers are some of the bravest people on earth. You know that feeling when it's 3 a.m. and you hear a noise in your house and you think to yourself, who would be out at this hour? Working a night shift job means that you are not only away from your family and friends during normal working hours. That's when I heard a knock on the front glass door. I walked over to the door and looked out. There was nothing there, so I went back to what I was doing. A couple minutes later, I heard another knock. Then it disappeared again. I immediately ran back inside and called 911. She asked me a couple more questions and then dispatched the police. I worked there for another 6 months after that, and every single night I would hear the knocking. Sometimes it was quiet, and sometimes it was loud enough to shake the windows. I never saw the guy again, though. The police report said that the maintenance man had found some sort of metal replica of a human face in the parking lot a week prior, but they never said anything else about it. I tried to tell the other employees and the manager, but they didn't believe me because it was so ridiculous. One night, I was rolling my bedpan collection cart down a hallway on the 3rd floor, and I heard some heavy footsteps behind me. I've worked there 3 years, and the hospital is extremely old. I quickly informed them that there was a ghost in the 3rd floor supply closet. They thought I was joking at first, but I insisted I wasn't. Back when I was 18, I woke up one night to a bang in the middle of the night. I lived in a small rural town, so when you hear a bang in the middle of the night, you assume it's thunder. This time I was annoyed, and I got out of bed to investigate. Feeling a bit creeped out, I decided to go back to bed. Around 5 a.m., I was woken up again to footsteps in the spare bedroom. This time, they were definitely right on the other side of the door. He was staying in that spare room at the time, and the last time I had heard him was at 2 o'clock in the morning when he came into the kitchen to get a drink. As I'm walking down the hallway to the spare bedroom, which is where the noise was coming from, I noticed that my daughter's door was slightly ajar. And remember, if you work the night shift, you should always watch your back. There may be someone or something lurking around waiting for you to let your guard down. Until then, I'll see you in the next one. It was completely empty. The footsteps had stopped. I checked under the bed and in the closet, and everything was fine. I got dressed and went to check on my daughter and to make sure she was okay. In the morning after, of course, not sleeping at all, I told my husband about it, and he said that maybe it was a dream. I thought it was weird that I was being woken up every hour starting at 2 a.m., but I figured it was probably nothing. I told them I heard footsteps, and I swear there was something in that closet. The floor is slanted, so you can hear when people are walking on the metal carts. I stopped and turned around, and there was nobody there. Now, mind you, the car wash area was fully enclosed with chain-link fence, of course. I ended up knocking over my cart and sending bedpans flying everywhere. After I picked myself up and dusted myself off, I finished my route, which was thankfully empty after that. And barbed wire, and there was no way for him to have gotten away without us seeing him. I quit not long after that. Every time I go past that gas station, I still hear the knocking in my sleep paralysis. Around 2 a.m., I was woken up again to another bang. Again, I checked on my daughter and then went back to bed. I assumed it was a tree branch hitting the house. Silence. Then we all started hearing footsteps inside the closet. They slowly opened the door, and inside was an empty mop bucket. I hope I never see that face again. I stayed on the phone with her until they got there. One of the responsibilities we had was to clean off the windshield of every car that came through the car wash. I was standing by the car wash vacuum area, waiting for the customer to come and pay. All I saw in the rearview mirror was the driver, and he rolled down his window a little bit, and I saw that he was missing half his face. Most of the cars during the day were regulars, and we knew the owners. At night, however, we would get all sorts of crazy characters. They searched the area, but obviously didn't find anything or anyone, and that's where the story ends. When I did, I could still hear the banging and the voice saying, "Let me in, please let me in," along with other things that I don't want to repeat. I don't remember what all I said to the operator, but it was something like, "There's a guy out here trying to break in, and he has been out here banging on the window, and he just showed himself and mouthed for me to help him." Again, I walked over and looked. Still nothing. This went on for about 15 minutes, with the knocking getting progressively louder. But you're also tasked with having to deal with whatever horrors decide to come out after dark. It's no wonder so many people lose their minds while working the night shift. From missing body parts to demons looking for a midnight snack, here are some creepy, true, scary stories from night shift workers. Our next story comes from Reddit user Mr. T. Sparkle. I was working a security guard job at a gas station in a very rural part of Tennessee. I had just started training on the night before, and I was by myself in the store. We were not allowed to have our phones out on the floor with us, so we either placed them in a locker or left them in the car. I left mine in my car, which was parked behind the pumps. I was doing my nightly routine of checking all the doors, making sure the alarms were set, etc. Then I got scared because I am alone and I don't have any way to call for help. I called my manager, who was off on a cigarette break, and he told me to stay on the phone with him and just to sit by the phone. I tried to get it in my sights, but it moved really fast and was gone. I told my manager what I saw, and he told me to come outside and look around. I didn't want to leave the counter, but he insisted. So I did. Well, as I'm sitting there talking to him, the knocking gets even louder and the glass begins to shake. My manager is telling me to stay on the line, but I can barely hear him because of how loud the glass is shaking. And then, as I'm looking out the window, I see a face pressed up against the glass. It was the scariest thing I have ever seen. As soon as I opened the door, the face was back at the window, and it mouthed, "Help me." Then she asked me if I felt threatened, and I said yes. I have never been so scared in my life. Our next story comes from Reddit user 𝗧𝗵𝗶. I used to work at a gas station in northern Indiana in the mid-2000s. One night I was closing up, and I had just finished cleaning off a car when this huge lifted truck with tinted windows drove through. He must have gotten spooked by me staring at him because he sped off without paying. Our next story comes from Reddit user 𝗧𝗵𝗲. I worked the night shift at a hospital. It happened again, and I started freaking out. I started running. Not the best idea since I was pushing a cart filled with soiled bedpans. On my way to the elevator, I passed 2 doctors and a nurse who were heading down the hall towards me. We slowly approached the closet, and I began banging on the door, calling out, "Hey, whoever's in there, come on out." Our next story comes from Reddit user 𝗧𝗵𝗲. She was fine, so I went back to bed. At around 4 a.m, I was woken up again to another bang, followed by footsteps. I slowly crept closer and started listening at the door. All I could hear was silence. I got up and went to the spare room, and I don't remember what made me do it, but I threw open the door. Feeling tired and annoyed, I went back to bed. Later that day, my husband's grandfather passed away. That's all for this video. Be sure to hit that subscribe button for more terrifying tales from night shift workers. It was 2 a.m. and the night shift workers were settling into their routine when suddenly the phone rang. The receptionist was used to late-night calls. Drunk people, people who thought they were having a heart attack because their dentures had fallen out. But this call was different. "Hello?" she asked. The voice on the other end was a raspy whisper. "Is anyone there?" It sounded like the voice was coming from underneath a blanket. Is anyone there?" It was hard to make out the voice, but it definitely sounded like it was coming from inside the hospital. "Yeah, who's calling?" The receptionist frowned. "I'm in room 317, the voice whispered. "I need some help." The receptionist stared at the phone. Room 317 hadn't been used for years. The voice on the other end let out a wet, hacking cough. Then it spoke again. "Hello?" Its voice was weak and reedy, like the sound of a bird that had been shot. "Is anyone there?" In fact, the entire 3rd floor had been shut down after a series of unfortunate incidents. "I think I might have a crazy person running around the hospital." The receptionist stood up and walked over to the wall. There were several phones mounted on it, each labeled with the room number they were connected to. She found the one marked 317 and ripped it from the wall. She turned and stumbled back into her office, slamming the door behind her. She fumbled for the lock, but her hands were shaking so badly that she couldn't get the thing to budge. She pressed her back against the door and slid down to the floor, tears streaming down her face. Whoever was on the other end of the line was slowly exhaling, almost like they were right behind her. "Red, what the hell are you doing?" "Answer me. Please, we have to get you out of there." She knew that whoever it was would probably just think she was playing a prank and leave her alone. She could hear the man on the other side talking frantically into a radio, trying to get help. "Please, I'm scared. You gotta get up. Please." Please let me in. What are you doing? Why aren't you answering me? Then he nodded slowly. Okay, he whispered. Stay right here. Don't move. I'll get help. But then the voice stopped. A moment later, she heard him start kicking the door. She watched as the gurney was wheeled past the door, dragged along by her coworker. But when they rounded the corner, the hallway was empty. The gurney lurched to a stop and her coworker froze, his eyes widening in disbelief. But in her mind, she was being hunted by a creature from beyond the grave. She pointed to the corner of the room where the gurney had been left. There's something in the hall, something dead. She looked down at the stairwell. It was empty. She could see the top of the roof, the emergency exit, and below that, the second floor. There was no third floor. The knocking grew louder and more insistent. Then she heard the voice of her coworker. She turned around in her chair to look over her shoulder, but there was nothing there. Then she heard a soft shuffling noise, followed by the distinct sound of footsteps. The receptionist dropped the phone and stumbled backward. Someone was walking down the hallway outside of the office. She could hear them getting closer. Whoever it was moving slowly, dragging something heavy along the floor. She watched as the shadow of the figure appeared in the doorway. It was tall and thin, like a scarecrow. Then he whispered, "No, if it's still here, then we wouldn't be alive. Maybe it really had just been some homeless guy. Maybe he just needed some help." It was also hunched forward, at an unnatural angle. He was standing in the elevator, his skin stretched tight over his bones, his eyes burning with a cold, unholy fire. And as he stepped out of the elevator, she saw what he was holding in his hand. It was the hospital phone, and it was dripping blood. She turned to her coworker and whispered, "Do you think it's still here?" As the seconds ticked by, she could feel herself calming down. Maybe it was just some homeless guy who had wandered in off the street. Maybe he just needed some help. What is it? What's going on? What's happening? She could see through the large windows of the reception area to the stairwell. The emergency exit sign flickered overhead, casting flickering shadows on the wall. Then she saw his face, or rather what had once been a face. It was pale and gaunt, like a skull. His eyes were wide and soulless. They were also filled with an ancient, bottomless hatred. He opened his mouth to speak, but all that came out was a wet, gurgling sound. Then he collapsed onto the floor. Its head was hanging so low that she couldn't see its face, but she could see what it was dragging along behind it. It was another gurney. She recognized the worn wheels and faded green paint. The gurney had been wheeled down to the basement earlier that day for repairs. She remembered because she had almost tripped over it while carrying a tray of coffee. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure standing at the top of the stairs, but it was gone before she could be sure. No one had ever died on the premises at Hillside Hospital, but 3 patients had taken their own lives within the span of a week. After that, the floor was sealed off. No one was allowed on it, not even the janitorial staff. That was hospital policy. And now someone was calling from an empty room on the 3rd floor. The receptionist looked around the office. Her 2 co-workers were fast asleep, slumped over their desks. She didn't want to wake them up. This probably wasn't anything. Probably just some kids messing around, trying to see if they could get their prankster video on Vine or TikTok or whatever it was that the kids were doing these days. But then the phone started ringing again. And when it did, the receptionist felt something cold slither up her spine. She picked up the receiver. "Hello?" The voice on the other end didn't respond. It just kept breathing heavily. The receptionist frowned. She went back to the phone. "Hello? Who's there?" The receptionist swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. She called out into the silent hospital. "Hello? Can somebody please come here?" No answer. Of course, there was no answer. It was the middle of the night, and her coworkers were probably too busy dreaming about pizza to care about what was happening. "Hello? She yelled into it. "Can you hear me? Hello?" A beat of silence. When it stepped out of the doorway, she gasped. As the gurney approached, she could smell something foul wafting from its depths, like the stench of rotting flesh. The receptionist screamed. She tried to run, but her feet felt like they were made of lead. Then she heard a knock on the door. She squeezed her eyes shut. "Hey, Red, is everything okay in there? You okay, Red?" "Get away," she whispered, burying her face in her hands. "Leave me alone." He knocked again. The receptionist sniffed and stood up. She walked to the door and put her ear to it. "Red, you gotta get up." Suddenly, the door burst open and her coworker stumbled inside. His eyes were wide with terror. "Come here," she said, grabbing his arm and pulling him close. Her coworker stared at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. He hurried out of the office, leaving her alone in the flickering light of the emergency exit sign. Then she heard the commotion in the hallway again. "Where is it?" she asked, standing up and walking to the door. "It's gone," he whispered. "The whole floor is gone." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "All the rooms, they're gone. There's number 3rd floor here." She stared at him, confused. Then she turned and walked to the window. She looked back at her coworker. "How can you lose an entire floor?" He shook his head. "I don't know. It wasn't here 5 minutes ago." They stared at each other in silence for a moment. Then he spoke again. "Maybe we should go tell security." She nodded. "Yeah, good idea." As they walked down the hall, she could feel something cold slithering up her spine. He looked at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. When they reached the elevator, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. But then the doors opened, and she saw him. The night shift can be a lonely time at the warehouse. Boxes stacked up to your eyeballs everywhere you go, and not another soul in sight. That is exactly why this story comes from a worker who was driving a forklift around the warehouse when he heard some weird noises coming from one of the unused sections of the building. He went to check it out, and that's where he found something terrifying. It was a soft whisper, like someone breathing right into his ear. "Mike," it said, and then silence. He looked around, his heart pounding in his chest, but saw nothing. "Mike, run." Adrenaline surged through his veins, and he pressed on, his foot heavy on the accelerator. The warehouse seemed to stretch on forever, its vast emptiness mocking his fear. Then suddenly, the figure was upon him. It lunged, its claws extended, and he swerved to avoid it. But there was nowhere left to go. Perhaps it was just the wind, he thought, trying to convince himself. The figure loomed over him, its claws scraping along the metal frame of the forklift. But it never reappeared. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and the memory of the red-eyed creature faded into a distant memory. Mike was working late. The usual hum of activity had died down, and the warehouse was almost empty. The voice was raspy, like sandpaper on wood, and it seemed to be coming from behind a stack of boxes. Curiosity, or perhaps morbid fascination, got the better of him. He walked slowly towards the sound, each step echoing in the vast emptiness of the warehouse. As he neared the boxes, the voice grew louder, more insistent. "Mike, please, come with me." They discussed what could have happened to Mike, their voices hushed, their eyes darting around nervously. The warehouse manager, a portly man with thinning hair and a permanent frown, stood by watching. Had Mike been taken by foul play? Was the warehouse harboring a more sinister presence than they had imagined? The police eventually gave up the search, declaring it a missing persons case. But the workers knew that something was terribly wrong. The workers became gaunt, their eyes hollowed with fatigue and fear. Their shifts dragged on, each hour an eternity. Then one night, the unthinkable happened. Another worker disappeared. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. The police searched the area, their movements swift and efficient. Some workers refused to stay late, their fear outweighing their need for overtime pay. Others, their loyalty to their friend and their sense of duty overriding their fear, stayed on. They worked in tense silence, their eyes constantly scanning the shadows, their ears attuned to the slightest sound. They shone flashlights into every nook and cranny, but found no trace of Mike. One of the older workers, his face lined with years of hard work and sleepless nights, spoke up. "We should get the authorities involved," he said, his voice gravelly. "This ain't right." He was stacking boxes near the loading dock when he heard it again, the soft whisper of his name. "Mike." He froze, his heart skipping a beat. He strained to listen, but the sound was gone. Was it the wind? A trick of his memory? Or so he thought. The murmur of voices replaced the silence, the squeak of shoes on concrete, the clatter of tools. Mike, shaken but determined, continued his work. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the warehouse grew busier, the shadows shorter, the danger seeming to fade with the light. Those who work the night shift now do so with a heavy heart, knowing that their loyalty to their job may come at a terrible cost. But some unseen force was drawing him in. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the hammering of his heart, and reached out to touch the darkness. His fingers brushed against cold, damp concrete. The voice whispered in his ear, "It's all right, Mike. I won't hurt you." But as the day wore on, the memory of the red-eyed creature lingered in his mind. His co-workers, alerted by his scream, rushed to the loading dock. What they found there sent chills down their spines. The boxes were piled haphazardly, as if someone had shoved them aside in a hurry, and the opening was dark and silent. The box tumbled to the floor, revealing a dark opening behind it. The voice beckoned again, this time urgent, desperate. "Come on, Mike, hurry." With a mix of fear and adrenaline, Mike stepped closer. The opening was dark and narrow, like a tunnel. He hesitated, his hand hovering over his chest. He closed his eyes tight, bracing for the end, but it never came. As the night shift fell once again, the warehouse fell silent. The boxes seemed to loom larger in the darkness, the shadows deeper, the silence more profound. Mike returned to the spot where he'd seen the creature. The red claw print was still there, a stark reminder of his encounter. Slowly, cautiously, he opened one eye, then the other. The cameras were old and grainy, and all they showed was a shadow, a fleeting glimpse of something moving through the darkness. His colleagues, seasoned veterans of the night shift, listened to his tale. Some nodded knowingly, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. They spoke of strange occurrences, unexplained sounds, and whispers on the wind. Had he stumbled upon something he wasn't supposed to see? Were the warehouse walls hiding something, some dark secret from the past? The figure was gone. In its place was a single blood-red claw print on the metal floor. But as he continued on his route, the voice followed him. "Mike, Mike, Mike." The voice grew louder, more insistent. And then he heard footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps following him. "Hi, I'm your host. And today we're going to be reading a creepypasta about a scary encounter at work. So turn off the lights, grab a blanket, and let's get into it." In the dark, dank, and lonely warehouse, the only light came from the bright moon shining through the grimy windows high above. This made for an eerie glow that illuminated motes of dust dancing in the still air. The floor was littered with cardboard boxes, piled precariously high and stretching as far as the eye could see. There in the shadows behind him, he saw a figure lumbering towards him. Its eyes glowed red in the darkness, its face hidden in the gloom. He slammed the pedal to the metal and turned the wheel sharply, narrowly avoiding a collision. The forklift lurched forward, its wheels squealing in protest. But the figure was quick, too quick. It moved with an unnatural grace, leaping over boxes and navigating the narrow aisles with ease. Mike had been working the night shift at this warehouse for over a year, and was used to the creaks and groans of the old building. But tonight was different. As he rounded a corner with his forklift, he heard a noise that made him stop dead in his tracks. He risked a glance over his shoulder and gasped. As he rounded another corner, he heard the voice again, closer than before. He slammed on the brakes, his heart hammering against his ribs. As dawn began to break, the warehouse slowly came to life. Did he imagine it? Was it a figment of his sleep-deprived imagination? Or was he truly in danger? He checked the security footage from that night, but it was inconclusive. Night after night, Mike returned to the same spot, hoping to catch another glimpse of the creature. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the warehouse floor, then he heard it again, closer this time. "Mike, come with me." He reached out a hand to steady himself on a nearby box, when suddenly it gave way. His rational mind screamed at him to run, to get as far away from this madness as possible. With that, he was pulled forward into the darkness, his scream echoing in the empty warehouse, swallowed by the shadows. The warehouse, once again, fell silent. The next morning, the workers gathered around the opening, their faces etched with worry. They agreed. Soon, the warehouse was bustling with activity as the police arrived, their voices sharp and businesslike. As the hours passed and there was still no sign of Mike, fear turned to despair. The workers exchanged uneasy glances, their faces pale. Night after night, the whispers echoed through the warehouse. "Mike, come with me." But the warehouse held its secrets close. Days turned into weeks. The whispers never ceased. And so the legend of the warehouse and its whispering entity continues, a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk even in the most ordinary of places. If you enjoyed this creepypasta, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content. You're going to want to hear this one, because I promise I am not making this up. I was working the night shift at a hotel front desk, and it was around 2 in the morning. I had just gotten off the phone with some lady who called down demanding to know why her iron was not in her room, and that she needed it immediately. She said she was on her way down, and that I better have it for her right away. As I looked through the other cameras, I realized that she was never seen getting back into the elevator. She simply vanished. The camera on the floor below showed her walking down the hallway and turning left, but the camera on her floor showed nothing but empty hallways. There were no signs of her anywhere. It was like she literally disappeared. I froze, not knowing what to say or do. Why would someone be walking around in a wheelchair in the middle of the night and then ask me where the ice machine was? It didn't make any sense. And then it happened again. Then she spoke. "Do you know where the ice machine is?" She asked in a raspy voice. Yeah, it's just down the hall," I responded, unsure of how to react. "Thank you." And when the doors opened, I saw her, but this time she was different. Her eyes were wide and filled with terror. The elevator doors closed, and the elevator began to move downward. I rushed to the security cameras and watched in horror as she rode the elevator down to the basement level. I had never seen anyone go down there in the middle of the night, let alone in a wheelchair. It was against hotel policy to allow anyone in the basement after 6 p.m., and I knew that my job depended on making sure that no one got hurt. Her hands were gripping the sides of the wheelchair for dear life, and her face was pale. "Help me," she whispered, her voice filled with fear. "Please help me," she replied, and then slowly moved past me and into the hallway. I watched her go. And if you're thinking what I'm thinking, how could she have disappeared if she was alone? I raced downstairs and fumbled with the keys to the basement door. Silence. I couldn't believe what I was about to say next. "Don't worry," I said, my voice echoing in the darkness. "I'm here to help you now." When it finally opened, I rushed inside and called out, "Hello, is anyone there?" But there was no response. I found the elevator and watched as it made its way down to the lowest level. With each creak of the old machinery, my heart pounded in my chest. Well, I never actually saw her face. All I could see was the side of her head and the top of her shoulder. "Excuse me, do you know where the ice machine is?" And where was she getting all the way to the ice machine on the other side of the hotel? I couldn't understand it. Just then, the manager walked by, and I quickly filled him in on what had happened. He looked at me, a confused expression on his face. "What are you talking about?" "There's no ice machine on this floor," he said, his voice full of concern. "Really?" I asked, taken aback. "Yeah, there's no ice machine on any of the floors," he replied, still sounding confused. "There's a vending machine on every floor, but no ice machine." I looked up to see the same woman in the wheelchair. Yeah, it's right down the hall," I said, surprised to see her again. She thanked me and slowly moved past my desk and into the hallway. And since the incident happened so fast, I never had enough time to register her features. But even then, I knew something was wrong. I told her that there were irons available for guest use on every floor, and that there was no need to get upset. She wasn't asking me where the ice machine was. She was asking me where the incinerator was. "We don't have an incinerator," I said to myself, panic rising within me. I knew that every hotel is required to have one, but I had never seen it before. It must be somewhere around here, I thought, frantically searching for the source of the commotion. I mean, why else would someone be creeping around a hotel in a wheelchair in the middle of the night? Guest services had received multiple calls that night about a broken elevator. Maybe she was stuck on the floor above and was trying to make her way down. But that didn't make any sense either. The maintenance man had been called, and the problem had been fixed hours ago. Besides, it was incredibly unlikely that she would have been able to walk down the stairs, especially considering that she was in a wheelchair. Something was definitely wrong. Was she crazy? But I figured that maybe she had just come from physical therapy or something like that, and was heading back to her room before I remembered that the hotel doesn't offer physical therapy. It doesn't even offer spa services. So why would someone need a wheelchair in the middle of the night? But of course, I still felt bad that we did not have an iron in her room. So after hanging up, I grabbed the closest available iron and ran to the elevator, which was conveniently located directly outside my window. I headed towards the elevator and watched as it made its way back down to my floor. I knew that the elevator stopped at every floor, so I took this chance to check the security camera on my floor to see if I could spot her. And that's when I saw her enter the elevator on the 4th floor. Relief washed over me as I realized that she hadn't vanished. She was somewhere safe. As I entered, I watched as the elevator doors slowly opened up and stared in shock as I saw a woman standing inside. Now, here's where things get weird. This woman had not gotten off the elevator. The woman that got off on the previous floor was supposed to be staying on the 5th floor, but she was getting off on the 1st floor. You see, when guests enter the elevator, they always go straight up to their respective floors. And as you can imagine, nobody goes down in the middle of the night except for staff members. Since I worked the night shift, I was familiar with all the staff members and their routines. None of them would take the elevator to get to their respective floors, so they wouldn't have been going down. Also, this was a small hotel with only 4 floors, so there was no reason for someone to be riding the elevator down in the middle of the night. I started to feel uncomfortable. I wanted to get to my floor, which was the 3rd floor, and I figured that she must be going up to one of the higher floors. So I stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the 4th floor, and then stood there waiting for the doors to close. They didn't. They remained open as I watched her walk out and slowly disappear into the shadows as the elevator continued to move up. No, really, the elevator went all the way up without the doors ever closing. Once the indicator flashed the number 4, I thought that maybe I had been seeing things. So I walked over to the security monitors to see what the cameras caught. And that's when I saw it again. The woman stepping out of the elevator and then walking away. It wasn't my imagination, but that's not all. It wasn't normal for a guest to be wandering the halls in the middle of the night, especially not in a wheelchair. And that's when it hit me. So despite the fact that I had work to do and that my shift was already running behind, I decided to investigate. That's when the doors opened, and I noticed that she was closer than I thought. In fact, she was right outside my office door. After a few moments, I returned to my desk and tried to focus on my work, but I couldn't help but think about the strange encounter. I was working at my desk when the elevator doors opened up, and I heard a familiar voice. I shook my head in disbelief. Why was she here again? My heart skipped a beat. I was horrified as I realized what this meant. Just then, I heard the sound of the elevator making its way down. Before I could respond, she was gone. So I did the only thing I could think to do. Then suddenly, the lights flickered and the elevator lurched to a halt.